Friends, thank you for being here today. What if I told you that while global trade experts obsess over the Suez Canal blockages and Panama Canal droughts, Canada has quietly activated a trade route that could reshape how goods move between three continents? And what happens when the world's most remote port suddenly becomes more strategically valuable than some of the busiest harbors on Earth? Most people don't realize that Canada possesses the only deepwater Arctic port in North America that connects directly to the continental railway system. While shipping companies scramble to find alternatives to increasingly unreliable southern routes, a small town on the shores of Hudson Bay is positioning itself to become the logistics hub of the 21st century. This is the story of Churchill, Manitoba, and why geography professors are calling it the Mediterranean of the future. But to understand why this matters, we must first examine the crisis that's forcing the world to look north. For decades, global trade has relied on a handful of critical choke points. The Suez Canal carries roughly 12% of global trade. The Panama Canal handles about 6% of all commercial shipping. But these arteries are failing. The Panama Canal is facing its worst drought in recorded history. Water levels have dropped so severely that authorities have been forced to reduce daily ship transits from 38 to just 24. This is not a temporary weather event. This is the new normal. Climate scientists project that these water shortages will only worsen, effectively cutting the canal's capacity by 40% over the next decade. The economic implications are staggering. Each day of reduced capacity costs the global economy an estimated $200 million in delayed shipments and rerouted cargo. Insurance companies are raising premiums for Panama Canal transits by up to 15%, making alternative routes increasingly attractive to cost-conscious shipping companies. Meanwhile, the Ever-Given blockage of 2021 demonstrated how fragile the Suez route really is. A single ship ground global commerce to a halt for 6 days, costing the world economy an estimated $9.6 billion daily. Shipping companies learned a hard lesson. When you have no alternatives, you have no power. The Suez situation has only become more precarious since then. Political instability in the region, combined with increasing ship sizes that barely fit through the canal, creates a perfect storm of vulnerability. Maritime insurers are quietly advising clients to diversify their routing strategies, acknowledging what industry insiders have known for years. The traditional choke points are becoming liability traps. This vulnerability has forced logistics experts to ask an uncomfortable question. What happens when the world's most critical shipping lanes become unreliable? The answer increasingly points north to Canada, but the crisis extends beyond these famous canals. The Strait of Malacca, through which 25% of all traded goods pass, faces similar pressures. Congestion has increased transit times by an average of 72 hours over the past 3 years. Pirates, environmental regulations, and political tensions between regional powers have turned what was once a reliable shipping lane into an unpredictable bottleneck. Port congestion in traditional hubs adds another layer of complexity. Los Angeles and Long Beach, which handle 40% of U.S. container imports, regularly experience delays of 2 to 3 weeks during peak seasons. European ports like Rotterdam and Hamburg are struggling with similar capacity constraints, forcing ships to wait offshore or divert to secondary ports. Climate change is rewriting the map of global trade in real time. The Arctic Ocean, frozen solid for most of human history, is becoming navigable for longer periods each year. Since 1980, sea ice coverage in Hudson Bay has declined by nearly 50%. The shipping season, once limited to July through September, now extends from June through November, and marine scientists predict year-round navigation could be possible by 2040. What makes this transformation particularly significant is the speed at which it's happening. Arctic sea ice is disappearing at a rate of 13% per decade, far faster than most climate models predicted even a decade ago. This is not a gradual transition that shipping companies can plan for over generations. It's a revolutionary change happening within the career span of current maritime professionals. The implications for global shipping patterns are profound. Traditional Great Circle routes, which represent the shortest distances between points on a sphere, are being redrawn as Arctic waters become accessible. Navigation companies are updating their route optimization software to include Arctic passages that were impossible just 20 years ago. This isn't just an environmental story. It's the most significant change to global trade geography since the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869. A new ocean is opening for business, and Canada controls the key. Let me put this in perspective. A cargo vessel traveling from Hamburg, Germany to the industrial heartland of North America traditionally has two options. Sail through the Atlantic to eastern ports like New York or Montreal, then ship the goods by rail across the continent. Or transit through the Panama Canal to reach west coast ports, then ship eastward by rail. But the Churchill route changes the mathematics entirely. A ship using the Arctic Gateway cuts approximately 6,000 kilometers off the journey from northern Europe to central North America. That translates to 12 days of sailing time and roughly $500,000 in fuel costs per voyage. More importantly, it eliminates dependence on the vulnerable choke points that have become synonymous with supply chain risk. A Churchill-routed shipment bypasses the Suez Canal entirely, avoids the congested Panama Canal, and reduces exposure to piracy-prone waters in the Indian Ocean and South China Sea. For grain exporters, this represents a revolution. Canadian wheat can now reach European and African markets faster and cheaper than grain shipped from traditional agricultural exporters like Argentina or Australia. This isn't theoretical. Preliminary shipping trials have demonstrated 18% cost savings compared to traditional routes during peak Arctic shipping seasons. The strategic implications extend beyond cost savings. In an era where food security has become a national security issue, reliable grain export routes provide enormous diplomatic leverage. Countries facing food shortages will increasingly prioritize relationships with suppliers who can guarantee delivery, regardless of global shipping disruptions. Churchill, Manitoba isn't just any port. It represents something unique in global logistics, a deep water facility that can accommodate the largest cargo vessels, connected directly to the North American rail grid by a single, strategically vital rail line. The Hudson Bay Railway stretches nearly 1,000 kilometers from Winnipeg to Churchill, crossing some of the most challenging terrain on the continent. This rail line traverses permafrost, peat bogs, and countless waterways. Maintaining it requires thermal siphons, sophisticated probes that extract heat from the ground to keep the permafrost frozen and the track stable. The engineering challenges are immense, but they're also what makes Churchill irreplaceable. The rail line crosses 13 major rivers, including the Nelson, Hayes, and Seal rivers. Each crossing required specialized bridge construction techniques designed to withstand both spring ice breakup and the gradual shifting of permafrost beneath the foundations. During winter months, temperatures along the route can drop to minus 50 degrees Celsius, creating steel so brittle that rail maintenance crews must use specially formulated tools and lubricants. Track expansion and contraction rates in these temperature extremes require constant monitoring and adjustment. Critics often point to these challenges as weaknesses: the seasonal limitations, the engineering difficulties, the remote location. But strategic analysts see these apparent drawbacks as advantages. The very factors that make Churchill difficult to reach also make it impossible for competitors to replicate. Building a competing Arctic port would require decades of infrastructure development, billions in investment, and the kind of specialized Arctic engineering expertise that takes generations to develop. Churchill's challenges aren't bugs. They're features that create an unassailable competitive moat. Russia has its northern sea route along the Siberian coast, but that route remains under Moscow's control and is subject to the political volatility of the Putin regime. International shipping companies are increasingly nervous about depending on Russian-controlled infrastructure. Recent geopolitical tensions have highlighted this vulnerability. Several major shipping lines have quietly developed contingency plans that avoid Russian-controlled Arctic routes entirely, viewing them as unacceptable political risks regardless of cost savings. The Northwest Passage through Canada's Arctic archipelago offers another alternative, but it remains the subject of sovereignty disputes with the United States and other nations. Churchill, however, sits entirely within Canadian territorial waters. There are no disputes, no international complications, just Canadian sovereignty and the rule of law. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Churchill's development is how it's being managed. In 2016, the port was on the verge of collapse after its American owners shuttered operations. The rail line was damaged, the town was cut off, and food prices skyrocketed. What happened next represents a new model for resource development in the Arctic. The Arctic Gateway Group, a consortium of 29 First Nations communities in 12 northern Manitoba towns, purchased both the port and the railway. This isn't just a business transaction, it's economic reconciliation in practice. For the first time, the profits from this crucial trade infrastructure will remain in the communities that have lived on this land for millennia, rather than flowing to distant corporate headquarters. The Inuit and Cree communities that make up the Arctic Gateway Group bring something invaluable to port management: generational knowledge of Arctic conditions. They understand ice patterns, weather systems, and wildlife migration in ways that no southern consultant could replicate. Their traditional knowledge is being integrated with modern technology in unprecedented ways. Community elders work alongside marine engineers to optimize shipping schedules based on traditional ice formation patterns that often prove more accurate than satellite data. Local hunters provide real-time wildlife movement information that helps ships avoid environmentally sensitive areas. This partnership also addresses one of the most common criticisms of Arctic development: environmental impact. The communities that depend on Hudson Bay for traditional hunting and fishing have the strongest incentive to ensure that increased shipping does not damage the ecosystem. The Arctic Gateway Group has implemented strict speed limits for vessels in beluga whale migration areas and established monitoring systems to track the impact of ship noise on marine life. This is not just environmental stewardship, It's a business model that proves industrial development and ecological protection can coexist. The environmental monitoring systems they've installed are among the most sophisticated in the world. Underwater acoustic sensors track marine mammal movements and behaviors, allowing port operators to adjust shipping schedules in real time to minimize disturbance. Air quality monitoring stations provide continuous data on emissions from port operations and visiting vessels. The rise of Churchill as a major trade hub represents more than logistics efficiency. It signals a fundamental shift in North American economic geography, away from north-south integration toward east-west diversification. For 80 years, Canadian economic policy has been built on the assumption that our prosperity depends on seamless integration with the United States. We built our pipelines south, our highways south, our trade relationships south. But the Churchill Gateway offers something different: direct access to global markets without American intermediation. This isn't anti-American sentiment, it's strategic diversification. In an era where American trade policy has become increasingly unpredictable, with tariffs imposed on Canadian steel and aluminum under national security provisions, having alternative routes to market represents basic economic security. The implications extend beyond trade. As Arctic shipping routes become more viable, questions of sovereignty become paramount. Russia has aggressively militarized its northern coast, reopening Soviet-era bases and deploying nuclear-powered icebreakers. China, despite being 1,400 kilometers from the Arctic Circle, has declared itself a near-Arctic state and is investing heavily in polar research and icebreaker technology. Beijing envisions a polar Silk Road where Chinese goods flow over the top of the world to European and North American markets. In this context, a thriving Canadian-controlled port at Churchill isn't just economic infrastructure. It's a sovereignty asset. Every ship that docks at Churchill, every ton of grain that moves through Hudson Bay, strengthens Canada's claim to Arctic waters. Transforming Churchill from a seasonal grain port to a year-round trade hub requires significant investment. The current port facilities can handle smaller vessels, but accommodating the massive container ships that dominate global trade requires infrastructure upgrades. Plans are underway to deepen the harbor to accommodate post-Panamax vessels, ships too large to transit the Panama Canal. This involves dredging operations in some of the most challenging marine environments on Earth, where temperatures can drop to minus 40 degrees Celsius. The rail infrastructure also requires modernization. The Hudson Bay Railway currently operates as a single-track line with limited capacity. Expanding to double-track in key sections would allow bidirectional traffic and dramatically increase throughput. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Churchill's development is its potential as more than just a cargo hub. As global supply chains digitize, the port is positioning itself as a data gateway, as well as a physical one. Submarine fiber optic cables laid through Hudson Bay could create the shortest communication links between Europe and Asia, making Churchill a node in the global internet infrastructure. In an age where data latency measured in milliseconds can be worth billions in high-frequency trading, this digital Northwest Passage could be as valuable as the shipping lanes. I want to pause here because this raises a critical question that I'd love to hear your thoughts on. Do you believe the economic and strategic benefits of opening Arctic trade routes justify the massive infrastructure investments and potential environmental risks? Or should Canada focus its resources on expanding existing southern ports and rail connections? This isn't just an academic debate. These investment decisions will shape Canada's economic geography for the next century. Please share your perspective in the comments below. I rate every response and often feature thoughtful analysis and follow-up videos. International shipping companies are beginning to take notice. Several major European logistics firms have signed preliminary agreements to test Churchill routes for grain and mineral exports. Agricultural commodity traders are particularly interested. Canada produces roughly 35 million tons of wheat annually, much of which currently moves through West Coast ports for Asian markets or St. Lawrence ports for European markets. Churchill offers a third option that could prove crucial during peak harvest seasons when existing ports reach capacity. The mineral sector sees even greater potential. Northern Manitoba and Saskatchewan contain some of the world's largest deposits of nickel, lithium, and rare earth elements, materials essential for electric vehicle batteries and renewable energy systems. Currently, these materials are extracted in the north, but processed in the south, often in the United States or China. Churchill could anchor a northern value chain where materials are extracted, processed, and shipped without ever leaving Canadian territory. European trade officials are watching Churchill's development with particular interest. The European Union has been seeking alternatives to Russian energy and raw material imports, and Canada offers what Europe desperately needs: a stable, democratic supplier with efficient logistics. If you're finding this analysis of Canada's Arctic strategy valuable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us continue producing in-depth geopolitical analysis on the economic trends that are reshaping our world. The transformation of Churchill from a remote grain port to a potential Arctic trade hub represents more than infrastructure development. It symbolizes a broader shift in how middle powers like Canada can leverage geographic advantages to maintain strategic autonomy in an increasingly complex global economy. Climate change is reshaping the geography of global trade, whether we like it or not. The question isn't whether Arctic shipping routes will become important. They already are. The question is which nations will control them and how they'll be managed. By 2030, Churchill could be handling 5 to 10% of Canada's grain exports and significant volumes of critical minerals. By 2040, if infrastructure investments continue and ice conditions remain favorable, it could rival Montreal and Vancouver as a major Canadian port. But this transformation isn't inevitable. It requires continued investment, political will, and careful balancing of economic opportunity with environmental responsibility. The success or failure of this project will be measured not just in cargo tonnage or shipping costs, but in Canada's ability to diversify its economic relationships and reduce dependence on any single trading partner or route. Friends, we are witnessing the emergence of a new chapter in global trade geography. Now, while the world's attention focuses on traditional choke points and their vulnerabilities, Canada is quietly developing what may become the most important trade route of the 21st century. Churchill, Manitoba, a town of fewer than 1,000 people on the shores of Hudson Bay, sits at the center of this transformation. The Indigenous communities that have called this region home for millennia are now stewarding what could become a cornerstone of global commerce. This isn't just a Canadian story. It's a preview of how climate change, geopolitical tensions, and technological innovation are combining to redraw the map of international trade. The Arctic is no longer a barrier to global commerce. It's becoming a highway. The nations and communities that adapt to this reality will prosper. Those that cling to outdated assumptions about geography and trade routes may find themselves increasingly marginalized in the global economy. Canada has the geography, the technology, and increasingly the political will to make Churchill a success. Whether this potential becomes reality will depend on continued investment, careful environmental stewardship, and the ability to navigate complex international relationships. But one thing is certain, the world is watching. And for the first time in generations, the eyes of global commerce are turning north. Thank you for joining me for this deep dive into Canada's Arctic Gateway strategy. What aspects of this transformation do you find most significant? Share your thoughts below, and I'll see you in the next analysis.